Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Show.live. Mitch Jackson here. First time on Huzza. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's always good to be here. I am getting comfortable with the platform, and we will be joined today by a special co-host, Nicole Abood. Unfortunately, my regular co-host, Jennifer Hoverstad, is a bit under the weather today, and so she and I believe Nicole too, will be all connecting down in San Diego on Thursday at Social Media Day, San Diego, so that should be fun. So I've given Jennifer strict instructions to take it easy, to get well, and make sure she's running on all cylinders this upcoming Thursday down in San Diego. So, Mark, it's good to see you too, my friend. There she is.
Hi.
You look like you've been doing this since day one, Nicole. It's so good to see you. Sorry about.
It's been a while.
You know what? It's great to see you. And, it's interesting. Nicole and I are both kind of kicking the tires on this new platform, for at least for me anyway. But for those regular viewers who are looking at the screen and saying, hey, that's not Jennifer Hoverstad. That's Nicole Abood.
She's changed.
You know what? I just love surrounding myself with talent, everybody. And Nicole, before we jump into the show, let me just share a little bit with you, with our audience. And you've been a guest on the Show.live.
Yeah.
Nicole is a friend of mine from the Los Angeles area. I've always introduced you as an attorney, but I'm noticing former attorney. She's a millennial speaker. She's a consultant. She's doing amazing things, both in the podcasting, on the podcasting platforms, on social media, on Snapchat, on helping young entrepreneurs, millennials, and young lawyers really structure their lives and their businesses for not only success, but also enjoyment. And she's agreed to sit in today as my very special co-host for Jennifer Hoverstad. So, hi, Nicole. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I feel like a new platform pops up every day, so I can't keep up. But this one looks pretty cool, so I'm excited.
It does look pretty cool. And I spoke with our guest, Carmine Gallo, earlier today. Carmine, we will be bringing you in about 8 minutes or so, so just sit tight. I believe the way it's going to be working is I'll be clicking on your name and I'll be able to invite you in. We'll deal with that when the time comes. But yeah, it's interesting how with technology, the only constant is change, right? Especially with live streaming. Yeah. When you look back at Meerkat and everyone jumping on that a year and a half ago, and now it's no longer around as we know it.
Right. And Periscope and all those changes.
It's exciting, So sometimes you just have to, jump on something in the last 10 or 15 minutes and make it work, just like you did today.
Right, exactly. Well, you know what? The thing is, I trust you, Mitch, and I feel like you can lead the way, so I'll just follow.
Well, I appreciate that. If there's one thing I'm good at, is making mistakes quickly and trying out new things. And what I'm really excited about, Nicole, is we're going to bring in Carmine Gallo in a few minutes. He's the author of The Storyteller's Secret. You can see I'm actually like halfway through actively reading this with my marker and everything else. It's really, really good. I recommend this for any professional that wants to improve their storytelling skills. But he's also the author of Talk Like TED. And on our last trip back from the UK, Nicole, that's the book I read on our trip and finished on our flight home. And it's just a brilliant piece of work where Carmine's interviewed and analyzed, I think, hundreds of TED Talk speakers. Wow. And consolidated into one book the steps that they use to so successfully make their presentations. And I'll give him a proper introduction when we start the show. But it's going to be fun. Hopefully, our audience on Blab is slowly trickling over to this platform, and both live and recorded. So it should be a good value show for those watching live and recorded. Real quick, are you going to be down in San Diego on Thursday?
I am. I'm going to be there. I'm going to stay Thursday until Friday.
You are? Okay. And what are you looking for? And by the way, everyone, we're talking about Social Media Day San Diego. Tyler Anderson, Casual Fridays, the person and company that are putting on Social Media Day San Diego, they happen to be one of our co-sponsors today. And so thank you for sponsoring the show, Tyler, and Casual Fridays. Social Media Day San Diego, what are you looking forward to,
Honestly, I am looking forward to meeting you in person finally, and then seeing all the other lawyers who are kind of doing this crossover thing with social media, or who are really engaged in social media. It would be cool to see our little group of lawyers there.
I can't wait. Well, can we plan on doing, an early lunch or an early dinner or something like that?
Sure. And we're definitely going to do that.
Okay. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you. Well, I saw you in San Francisco, but I was on stage and you were in the audience, and
I had to go.
You need to stick around to say hi, but I'm bringing my daughter down on Thursday. I'm bringing AJ, and I've been telling you I want you to meet her.
Yeah.
So
I'm excited.
She's my wingman on Thursday, so we're really looking forward to it. And, we have one more sponsor for today's show, Nicole, before we jump into the show, and that is rightside.co. Rightside.co, everyone, shares the new domains on the right side of the .lawyer, .ninja, .show.
Okay.
The Show.live.
Yeah.
And special thanks to Mark Gawaith and his team of professionals over at rightside.co for doing all the things that they're doing, and really allowing us some exciting options with the domains and the domain names that we can use today. Real quick, we have an exciting lineup, everyone. Over the next couple of months, we're booked on the Show.live. We'll be bringing
you
this
guys
show.
are busy.
We're busy. We're going to be bringing the show probably over to this platform from Blab because of the hiccups, but we're off on July 4th. So we want everyone to put their phones down and just enjoy the day, right, with your family and friends. But on July 11th, we have Gary Vaynerchuk on the show. Okay, Mr. Hustle. I mean, he thinks he's hustling. He hasn't met me yet, but we're going to have, he has met me actually, but we're going to have Gary on the show. It should be great. Everyone, will include the link. You can RSVP at the Show.live, RSVP for the Gary Vaynerchuk show. We have 110, 120 people who have RSVP'd, Nicole, over on Blab. Wow. And we need to bring those people over onto this platform. So now if you click on Gary's picture and RSVP, it'll take you to the updated show on this platform. So it should be pretty cool. Yeah. So here's what I want to do. This is kind of new, both for Nicole and I. I want to try to bring Carmine in. There's a button here. It says invite Carmine to the broadcast. And by the way, I've made you a co-host. So I'm assuming you're seeing the same screen that I am, correct? Over on the right? So. Okay. All right. Yeah. So let me click on that and see what happens. It says sending an invite. So Carmine, it's sending you an invite. I think it's an email if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So maybe not. There he is. There he is. Hi, Carmine. It's good to see you.
Hello.
So, hello. So, Carmine, this is Nicole Laboud. Nicole.
Hi, Nicole.
Nice to meet you.
I feel like I look like a pilot with this headset. Great headset, though.
You look official. It looks like you're the one that knows what he's doing on this show.
Right.
Real quick, Carmine, we were talking earlier, and just before we jump into the show, when I clicked invite to you, did you get a link in your screen, or did you have to click on an email address?
The invite that you just sent to me, I saw it pop up on the screen.
Okay, very, very good. I appreciate that. Well, let's jump right into the show, everybody, and let me give Carmine just a proper but brief introduction. And Carmine's the founder of Gallo Communications, an American author. He's a columnist. He's a keynote speaker. He's a former journalist and news anchor. Gallo Communications offers communication skills for the world's most admired brands, from computers to cars, from agricultural products to communicate to consumer brands. You know what? I'm looking at this. I don't want to mess it up, Carmine. Your company touches the life of consumers on an everyday basis. Now, where I got the motivation to reach out to Carmine, to be really honest with you, was when I read your book, Carmine, Talk Like Ted. Yeah. I mean, I was telling Nicole I was flying back from the UK.
Yeah, that's how we got to know each other.
That's how we got to know each other, and it knocked my socks off. And I'm like, what a brilliant piece of work. And then with your recent book, The Storyteller's Secret, as a trial lawyer, and
I have competing covers for you. Competing covers.
Is mine old and out of date? Because I jumped on this when it first came out.
Yours is the what's called a galley that they send to reviewers early on. This is the official cover, though. See, hold it up. Talk like Ted. See, it has Talk Like Ted.
So hold it up so we can have everybody take a screenshot real quick. Everyone take a screenshot with their mobile devices, and that's what they'll be doing. Thank you very much, Carmine.
There you go.
And it's interesting because storytelling is such a a popular topic in today's world, especially with social media. The truth be told, trial lawyers have been telling stories forever, okay? And that's the way good trial lawyers win cases. That's the way you connect and build rapport with your jurors. And when I read Carmine's book, and I'm actually halfway through it a second time, there are so many tips and tools and approaches, Carmine, in your book, The Storyteller's Secret, that I recommend it to every young professional, regardless of what you're doing for a living. Get this book, learn these techniques, because I think they are learnable techniques, and start raising the bar in what you do. My question for you to get things going is, what inspired you to write The Storyteller's Secret? And maybe, well, why don't we start off with that? What inspired you?
The book you read on the plane, Talk Like TED. So I am not affiliated with the TED conference, but as you suggested, I am a communication coach. So I work with many leaders who run some of the largest brands in the world. And much of my content was appealing to people who are also giving TED Talks. So, and I've sort of lost count, Mitch, of how many times I have been sent links to TED Talks from people who have read my content and who start applying it. So I spent, because I am a journalist, I looked at it from a journalist perspective. And I analyzed about 500 TED Talks, 150 hours or so. And I've also interviewed over the past 2 or 3 years, I've interviewed some of the most famous TED speakers of our time. And so I got a little insight into how they prepared. So I wrote a book called Talk Like TED, which I think is a very good book for any type of presentation, not just giving a TED Talk. In fact, very few people will ever give a TED Talk. But how do we use TED, which is now the gold standard of public speaking and presentations? How do we use TED to make ourselves be able to speak better, more clear, more compelling, even more visual when you're delivering a PowerPoint or a presentation? So I wrote that book, the one that you read on the plane. And there is one chapter in the book called storytelling. Almost all great TED speakers focus on story. They make emotional connections before they go into the data or the facts to support their argument. And really the only way you can make that emotional connection is through story. That became a relatively popular chapter, and a lot of people talk to me about story. So I just explored that topic and blew it out into a book. But it was very interesting the way it all came about, Mitch, because after I wrote Talk Like TED, I was trying to think of what's new, what's next. And I had gone to a few conferences, and I met a billionaire venture capitalist named Vinod Khosla. And I mentioned this story in the preface to The Storyteller's Secret. And you may remember the story. I was invited to a very exclusive gathering. Bill Gates was there, Sergey Brin and Larry Page were there, Condoleezza Rice, Tony Blair from England. So Vinod Khosla is very plugged in. And I went through that period of self-doubt. I started asking myself, what am I doing here? I'm not curing, I'm not making search engines. I'm not curing coming up with vaccines for smallpox or malaria. What am I doing here? And then Vinod Khosla got up on stage, and there wasn't just obviously those people. There were many other business leaders in the audience. And Vinod said, all of you are brilliant, which is why I partner with you or why I invest in you. But very few people can tell a story. And he said, facts alone are not enough. You have to do storytelling if you want to engage people. And so based on the popularity of my previous book on TED, based on things I was learning in the field, I realized that storytelling is a topic that many people don't understand. You had suggested that it's a hot topic. I agree and I disagree, because I think it's a hot topic among the legal field, marketers, senior leaders. But among the average business owner or small business owner or entrepreneur, I still don't think they get it. And so I think we have a lot of room, especially on this type of platform, to educate viewers as to what storytelling is and how they can apply it to be better communicators and better business leaders.
Love it.
And it's interesting. So Mitch, when you sent me the invite this morning,
Are you on a bridge? I love that your background.
I know, right? Everyone always asks that. I like it. Right afterwards, I'm gonna go walk that bridge. But when he sent me the invite, so 6 months ago I actually joined Toastmasters, and I get their magazine every month, and they always have an article about the power of storytelling. There's always something about storytelling in there.
Yes.
And it makes me wonder. So when we're telling stories, let's say we're just giving a presentation and we're telling stories, they're usually personal stories, right? That's where we're drawing from. So how do we make that connection with the audience? How do they care about what we're talking about, even when we're telling stories?
Well, I can provide you folks with resources, I assume, Mitch, and it's Nicole, right?
Yes.
Nicole, sorry. Okay. I was expecting Jennifer, but that's okay.
Yeah, she's not feeling well.
There is a wonderful TED Talk that I would recommend for everybody. It's Bryan Stevenson. Bryan Stevenson is a human rights attorney, and his claim to fame on TED is that he received the longest standing ovation of any TED speaker in TED's 30-year history. He also has a New York Times best-selling book called Just Mercy, which you can actually see them in Starbucks stores. So you've probably either heard of him or you've seen the book. Bryan Stevenson is an attorney who Mitch, you'd appreciate this.
I've watched it.
He knows how to persuade people, doesn't he?
Yeah,
because
it's brilliant.
He actually argues and wins cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. And he also talks about a topic that whenever he enters an audience, some people are going to be automatically very defensive because he believes that there are many people who are incarcerated unjustly, and he goes into certain prisons and goes into certain states and finds those people who he believes are on death row and shouldn't be on death row, and he wins their release. So there is a lot of controversy around that. So he told me, Carmine, in order for me to make an argument that's persuasive, to get people to empathize with me and to break down the barriers between me and people who are going to be automatically skeptical about what I say, I have to connect with them emotionally. And how do you do that? You do that through personal story. But you only use personal story that is relevant to the theme or your topic. So in this TED Talk that you'll watch, that some of you can watch online, it's only about 15 minutes. It's a 15-minute presentation. And yet he tells 3 very personal stories. He tells one story about his grandmother, who, when he was 11 years old, pulled him aside and had him make a promise to her, never to drink alcohol in his life. He said, hey, I was only 11 years old, and I made that promise. And he actually made it kind of funny. You know, he told a funny story about that experience. But then he said it gave him identity. And it gave him identity in a culture and maybe in poor surroundings where a lot of people don't have that identity. And then he says, hey, look, I admit it. I'm 52 years old and I've never had a drop of alcohol in my life. And it goes back to that identity that he got from his grandmother. And then Bryan Stevenson leads into the data and the statistics about mostly young men who are brought up in underprivileged or impoverished communities. So see, what he does is a story first, a personal story that relates to the theme, and then you can introduce the data. And that, Mitch and Nicole, is the formula that I think really works in terms of telling personal stories. Tell a story that relates to your theme, then segue into the data or the facts to support your theme. Tell a story, data, story, data. And that's the Bryan Stevenson outline. And look, I'm someone who's learning something new every day, every week. So when I have the opportunity to talk to somebody who wins cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, which, Mitch, I think you'll agree is probably the toughest audience out there, I want to learn something from them. And that's the way Bryan Stevenson approaches public presentations. So, Nicole, you were talking about personal stories. I think that's how you weave in personal stories, only when they're relevant and they back up the data. Right. But you only tell a personal story that lasts about 60 seconds. Once you start going into a story just goes on and on for 5 minutes, you're going to lose your audience.
Yeah.
And one of the things, Nicole, I really liked about Carmine's book, The Storyteller's Secret, which I will not hold up again because
you can't.
Oh, is that okay? Kidding. Okay. And it looks something like this. Is that
this looks better though? It looks better.
It does look better. Is that Carmine breaks down the steps that anybody can use to tell to properly tell an effective story, such as what he just shared with us. That would be one paragraph of one of dozens of chapters. And what's interesting to me, Carmine, is how the art of storytelling has changed so much with respect to social, live streaming, media, but as much as it's changed, it's remained the same. Okay, at least I think so. Can you share with our audience, because this is a live streaming show, it's a social media oriented show. And by the way, everybody, we will be bringing in your questions. So ask your questions and link them to the Q&A link, if you would, please. How has storytelling changed, if at all, because of social media and live streaming?
Well, I think now, because of live streaming and social media, all of us have the opportunity to share our stories with the outside world. So now we all have ideas, and those ideas don't mean very much if they're locked up inside of us. So now we have this amazing opportunity to share stories through Instagram, through Twitter, through Facebook. And I'm not sure people are doing it as authentically as they could be. I'm not sure if people are using social media in a way that really allows people to be brought into that story and to go along that journey with you. So when you're building out a new project, when you're introducing a new product, a lot of people still focus on the features and the benefits of those products. Whereas when I've always worked with CEOs and leaders who are coming out with new products, we always understood that the benefits alone are not enough. You have to tell the story behind those benefits. Well, now you've got these great platforms where you can bring people into the development of the products. How were they developed? Bring us into the focus groups. Show us some of the people who are working on the product. Tell the story behind the service or the product. Instead, what do people do? They still go back to the old, here's our new product, here's the features of our new product, and go out and buy it, click here now. So they're still they're only using social media to broadcast out the benefits or the features of a product, but they're not really telling me the story behind that product any more than they were before social media. So in fact, it's sort of like just a bad PowerPoint, where you see these presentations that are just full of bullet points and texts and features rather than the story behind those features. Look, there is a reason. And I wrote this in the book. There is a reason why a company like SAP, the German business software company, global company, there is a reason why Microsoft did the same thing, why both of those companies hire marketing folks whose title is Chief Storytelling Officers. Both those companies, SAP and Microsoft, have Chief Storytelling Officers, because it's not enough just to deliver new hardware or new software or new computers. You have to tell the stories behind those computers. Stories of, Nicole, we were talking about personal stories. Well, just as effective are stories about real people, case studies, real customers using those products. Those are great stories to share. But again, I really think very few people, especially in business today, share stories, whether they're personal stories, whether they're stories about your brand and where it's come from, whether it's stories about customers and how people are using your products and services to transform their lives. Those are all stories. There's a million stories. I'm a journalist, so I think it's a little easier for me to tell stories. And I've realized that in the last few years. People struggle with how to tell a story. Whereas I'm a journalist, so I see a story everywhere. I think everybody has a story and every company has a story. But I've realized in the past few years that that's a skill that I've developed as a journalist. I think the average business person or entrepreneur needs to start seeing themselves as brand journalists as well. If Microsoft can hire a chief storytelling officer, SAP does the same thing, many other companies, I think you, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you need to see yourself as the chief storytelling officer for your brand.
Mm-hmm. And see, it's good to hear that this is a skill that you've kind of honed in on and improved over the years, because I feel like, myself included, I'm not the best storyteller. So is this something that we can prepare ahead of time? Can we prepare our stories ahead of time? Or is this something that happens on the spot?
Well, here's the best part, and this was the fun part for me about writing the book, is, storytelling is part of our DNA. It's something we do naturally, which is really cool. It's a skill that all of us actually do have. I think what's happened, though, is because we're now in a PowerPoint culture that we've forgotten how to tell stories. Instead, we know how to develop slides.
Yeah.
We can create 300 slides that'll bore you to death and put your audience to sleep, but we've kind of forgotten that storytelling is natural to our DNA. Yeah. I don't want to bore people with the science, but just real quickly, the fun part for me was interviewing anthropologists who have actually studied storytelling. And storytelling started about 500,000 years ago, give or take a couple 100,000 years. They're still not sure about it. Mm-hmm. But when firelight around a campfire extended the day, people started telling stories at night around a campfire. And storytelling, apparently, according to anthropologists, was a huge development in human development. It was a big milestone because stories informed other people, they educated other people, they inspired other people. And I thought to myself, gosh, isn't that what we're trying to do today in all our business communication? We're doing the same thing. We want to inform you, we want to educate you, and we want to inspire you. So that's what we were doing 500,000 years ago. We know how to do this. Kevin Spacey, the actor from House of Cards, he had a great quote. He was speaking at a marketing conference, and he said, we know how this works. He was talking to marketers. He goes, we know how this works. Story is everything. We know that people want stories, and we know how to make good stories. So get back to the task of telling stories.
What's interesting, Carmine, is I tell young trial lawyers that this right here is the new digital campfire. I mean, this allows us to tell a story.
I could have used that quote, Mitch.
And you still can. You can claim full usage of it. It doesn't matter to me.
I will.
But what's interesting is this allows us from wherever we are to pull back the curtain and bring an audience maybe into an environment they don't normally see or hear about. And it allows us to tell a story. Yeah. Over on the right, I'm looking at some comments, and a good friend of mine who is one of the guys with rightside.co, which does great right side of the dot domains. Carmine, if you're interested in something really, really cool, we're offering those to our guests, and I'll reach out to you. Mark says, my wife says I'm horrible at telling stories. I think she is wrong. And that raises a question for me, and that is, how important is it to sometimes stop telling stories and start listening to your audience as to whether or not your stories, the way you're presenting them, are effective. After each trial, I talk to my jurors, what did you like? What didn't you like? Why didn't you feel this way? Some people I've seen, Carmine, over the years, they tell the same story from the stage over and over, and I don't think it has the effect that they think it does on the audience. Sure. Okay. How can storytellers get feedback effectively from their audiences, and then how important is it to modify their storytelling based upon that feedback?
Okay. Well, you just mentioned the key word, which is feedback. Most people don't ask for feedback. When I've interviewed some phenomenal entrepreneurs, super successful people, like Mark Burnett, for example. Let's use Mark Burnett. I devote a whole chapter to him. So Mark Burnett is the producer of Survivor. He really kind of launched the whole adventure reality show. And he's also the producer of The Voice, many other shows as well. So Mark Burnett is a very inspiring man because he came to the U.S. from England with $200 in his pocket and a dream to make it in America. And his first job was actually as a nanny in Beverly Hills. I don't know if you ever knew that story. He was a nanny in Beverly Hills. And that's when he realized something, and I think you'd appreciate this. He realized, the rich are actually no different than me, and they're not much smarter than me. So he started it's a great story in the book where he started selling T-shirts on Venice Beach, and he bought T-shirts for, I think it was $2 and sold them for $12. So, wow. But he learned how to pitch. He learned how to make a great pitch, and so what I learned from Mark Burnett is that even after the success of Survivor, when he had other ideas, he had to walk into television networks and pitch his ideas. It didn't matter if he had previous success. That's not the way the networks work. They want, well, what are you going to do for us today, and how are you going to make us money? So he would walk into the networks and he would give a pitch. Now, here's a guy who knows how to persuade. Guess what? He was turned down. So he went back to the drawing board and he started pitching around his friends. What went wrong? Why can't I tell the story behind this show as persuasively as I think I can? What's the problem with it? It's a great show. That show, by the way, turned out to be The Voice. So he's out there trying to pitch and people are turning it down. So he's constantly, and he told me this, you have to constantly refine your pitch and refine it in front of people, in front of your friends, in front of your peers, and always ask, maybe it's too long. Maybe I'm rambling. Maybe it's not clear enough. So it can be really clear inside your own head, but it's not connecting with people. So I think what you do, Mitch, naturally is because you're an attorney, and I've spoken to attorneys about storytelling as well, it's easier to get that feedback from juries. Obviously, you get immediate feedback from jurors, up or down, and then you can also question them later. So you're constantly learning how to refine your storytelling ability. Whereas I just don't think most people just go about telling the same brand story over and over, and nobody wants to say anything negative and you're not asking for feedback. One of the most powerful questions you can ask is, how did that go? And please be honest with me. What can I do differently?
I love that.
What can I do? Be honest with me. What can I do differently? Nobody ever asks for feedback either. That's another problem. You got to ask.
Yeah, it's just the fear of getting that negative feedback that stops a lot of people, but I guess you never improve otherwise. So,
oh yeah, no, you would be surprised at the people I've interviewed. And I write this in the book. Great storytellers are not born; they're made. They refine their craft over. It goes back to the 10,000 hour rule. It really does apply. I talked to a TED speaker. I guess I can mention her name, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. She is one of the most popular TED speakers of all time. You may know her. She's the woman who had a stroke. She's an MIT researcher, and she had a stroke, and she was able to kind of analyze her brain as she was having a stroke. It's an amazing TED Talk. She practiced that TED Talk 200 times. 200 times. Wow. There's another famous TED Talk, Amanda Palmer, who is a performance artist, musician, and she gave a TED Talk that also was very well received. She gave it 100. She practiced it 100 times, but she practiced it in front of people. So she would practice it in front of a classroom. When she was asked to speak to a class, she said, "I'll speak to your class if you'll give me the opportunity to practice my 15-minute TED Talk and get reaction from the class. What did you like? What didn't you like?" She actually sponsored or had people over to her house, and it was a potluck, and people brought food and stuff, but they'd have to sit through her 15-minute talk and then give her some feedback. And she did that like 100 times. Again, it's feedback, though. When you see a great presentation, or you watch somebody like a Steve Jobs, who I've written about, well, understand that they're not just made, okay? You don't just see them pop up and they have a great speech and a great presentation style. It usually takes many, many years of deliberate practice to get to where they are. Or if it's one great presentation, there's been a lot of practice, a lot of rehearsal, and a lot of feedback to go into it. So nobody just appears on a stage or delivering a presentation naturally gifted as a performer. I don't think that happens.
That's good to hear.
It's interesting how I think there's almost a mentality in today's world with instant gratification. I want results and I want them yesterday. And a lot of people aren't willing to put in the time, whether it's building a business, whether it's creating an app, whether it's learning how to tell a good story. Yeah. And when it comes to telling a good story, by the way, I shared, Carmine, the Bryan Stevenson link over in the chat of the TED Talk you referenced. We've also had Amy Cuddy on the show.
You did? Oh, great.
Yes, Amy was on the show a month or two ago, and I've shared her link there also. Fascinating talk. But with respect to,
can I stop you for a second, Mitch? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Absolutely.
Okay,
no,
so you mentioned Amy Cuddy. So Amy Cuddy is the Harvard researcher who wrote the best-selling book Presence, right?
Right.
I argue that you never would have heard of her nor would you have heard of Lean In from Sheryl Sandberg, you know, the big movement that encourages women in the workplace. These are individuals or movements that I argue only went viral. Sheryl Sandberg's talk on Lean In went viral from TED. Amy Cuddy went viral. You would not have heard of those topics if it had not been for the stories that those women shared in those TED Talks. Amy Cuddy is a researcher. Amy Cuddy has a lot of data behind it. But the reason why Amy Cuddy's video went viral, that led to a best-selling book, that led her to your show, Mitch, is because she was very open with talking about how she got into an accident. She lost a certain number of points on her IQ, and she really went through a period of self-doubt. And how did she come out of that self-doubt? And then she created presence, and she started learning about presence and how the way you think affects your body language and all that. She admitted recently, I don't know if she said this on your show, she did not want to share those stories. She was very reluctant to share the stories live. And then afterwards, she thought she had made a big mistake. And then the emails started coming in from people who she had touched. And she realized she was on something. Sheryl Sandberg said the same thing. Sheryl Sandberg shared very personal stories about her conflict as a working mother. It was the stories that went viral. So, Mitch, I can make the argument, I'm pretty confident about it, you never would have had Amy Cuddy on the show if it had not been for personal stories.
It was her personal story that touched me, and it made me want to listen and not click away. And then after listening to her personal story, we reached out and we had to have her on the show. And you're absolutely right. And for those of you just joining us, whether it's live or on the replay later this week, we are speaking with Carmine Gallo, author of Talk Like TED, and also The Storyteller's Secret. I want to invite our audience members, if they'd like to join us or live and ask you a question and say hello and meet you, or meet Nicole, just indicate over in the chat and we'll bring you in. Carmine, the importance of telling a story, as we just talked about with Amy, can you share with us maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 steps that we can take away from today's show to help us become better storytellers?
Yeah, absolutely. Number 1, tell stories. So let's start with that.
Show's over, everybody.
When was the last time in a PowerPoint presentation in a business meeting that you heard stories? Most people are very reluctant to do so. There's 3 types of stories that you should be weaving into every presentation. You can do one or all 3. I've seen all 3 done. One are the personal stories, so we've talked about that. One are the case studies, stories about other people, how other people are being affected and impacted by your products or services. And 3, stories about brand success. That's also very important if you're a manager or if you're a business owner. How has the brand itself impacted the lives of other people or your customers or your prospects? So those are 3 different stories that you should be weaving into every presentation. So that's number 1. Tell stories in the first place. Stories inform, they illuminate, they inspire. Most people don't tell stories. That's how you make emotional connections to people. But number 2 is when you tell stories, let's say you're giving a business presentation. And I think we need to address this briefly, Mitch and Nicole. Most business presentations are terribly drafted because people who use PowerPoint or Apple Keynote or Prezi, whatever you like to use, Prezi is a little different because Prezi kind of forces you to be more visual. But with Apple Keynote or PowerPoint, what do most people do? They just go through a list of text. And we know that text is actually not the most effective way of delivering information that is meant to be robustly processed in the brain, because you can't speak and then expect people to also read text at the same time. We can't multitask like that. So when you deliver those stories, make sure that your PowerPoints or your slides are visual. That's another big problem that continues to be a problem in business presentations today. TED, for example, at the TED Talks, when you can use slides, but there's no bullet points allowed. Watch a Steve Jobs presentation from maybe 2007 when he delivered the iPhone. It's on YouTube. It's a brilliant presentation. There are no bullet points on his presentation. It's all very visual. You could use text, but you have to be more visual than wordy. If I'm going to tell you a story, I'm just going to show you pictures. I'm going to show you images that complement the narrative. I'm not going to just show you text while I'm telling you stories. So that's another thing that people need to do. And also, I think this is a very important component of making information that's easy to be recalled, Mitch. And I'm sure you guys use this in the legal field all the time. And that's the rule of 3. 3 is a very powerful number in communication theory, which simply means that in short-term memory, you can only remember about 3 or 4 key points to take away. So there is a reason why most literature, for example, is broken up into 3. And this goes back in fables for hundreds of years. The 3 little pigs, the 3 musketeers, it's always 3. 3 is actually a very powerful number. So here's how it applies to public speaking. Remember, we were talking about Bryan Stevenson. Bryan Stevenson, go back, watch his TED Talk. It's about 15 or 18 minutes. He tells 3 stories. 3 stories. He doesn't tell 22. Tells 3. Steve Jobs, what's the most popular commencement speech of all time?
Stanford
commencement speech. In the first sentence almost of the speech, he said, I just have 3 simple stories to tell. 3, not 8. Yeah. Steve Jobs was really good at that. If he had a new product and he would say things like, we packed 200 new features into this product, but I'm going to give you 3 that apply to you. Right. So in other words, he would apply to his audience and give you 3 things to focus on, not all 200. Sandberg told 3 stories. Jill Bolte Taylor, her TED Talk was broken up into 3 parts. Her life before the stroke, how she was experiencing her stroke, and her life after her stroke. So 3 parts. 3. It's a very powerful number in storytelling. Speaking of storytelling, Hollywood movies, they're all broken up into 3 parts.
I was going to ask you about that.
That is so cool that when I learned that, I was like, oh my gosh, just like a great presentation. Hollywood film writers understand narrative. So why don't we learn from them? Every Hollywood movie, all successful ones, are broken up into 3 different parts. And Act 1 is the what's called the backstory. You have to set up the characters. Otherwise, you don't care about what happens to them. We don't care about what happens to Jack and Rose on Titanic until you get to know a little bit about them. Even though we know where the story's going, which is the brilliance of James Cameron. He actually wrapped us into a story, even though we know what's going to happen to the ship. Act 2 is the conflict. So that's where Titanic hits the iceberg. Act 2. Now the rest of that is conflict between hero and villain, and there's villains in Titanic as well. And then Act 3, of course, is the resolution. How are the heroes going to get out of this conflict, and what's going to happen to them? How are their lives going to be transformed? Every successful hit movie has those 3 acts, which is pretty amazing. Well, you can do the same with presentations. A pitch or a presentation should have those 3 acts. There should be the backstory. How did we get to where we are today? The conflict. What is the villain or the tension that's being introduced? And the resolution, which is how is my product or my service going to get you out of this mess? And how are you going to live a better life because of it? So this whole act of the 3-part structure or the number 3 in narrative is one of the most important numbers that you all need to know. So 3. If there's 3 things I can leave you with, stick to the number 3.
I love it. So
Got
powerful.
It. Right. And I'm a huge proponent of the 3-part presentation. So aside from breaking down your stories into 3s or your presentation into 3 stories, how do you discover your big idea for a presentation? And this is probably something you discuss in Talk Like TED, which I haven't got the chance to read just yet. But how do you discover the one major idea that you're supposed to talk about?
Not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy. The big idea is actually something that takes time. That takes the most time. But I do like to use an exercise. I like to use the exercise of Twitter. Twitter is 140 characters. Can you deliver your big idea in 140 characters or less? If you can get your big idea or your main idea across in 140 characters, then I think you're onto something. Because there is power in simplicity. There's power in condensing that big idea. Now, Steve Jobs, one of the reasons why I love talking about Steve Jobs is because he really was brilliant at communication. And he always would do this. Apple continues to do this to this day. Whenever they introduce a new product or a service or a concept, they always have like a one-sentence description attached to it. So when Steve Jobs introduced the MacBook Air, in 2008, he said, in a sentence, we've created the world's thinnest notebook. So the world's thinnest notebook becomes the headline. It was the headline to the press release. It was the headline to the presentation. And then the rest of the presentation is, how did we do this and what does it mean to you? But you can do that with a product. You can do that with an idea. So if you go to TED.com and take a look at all of the titles of the presentations.
Yeah.
There isn't one title that's over 140 characters. And they're not titles to product. They're titles to ideas, to themes. How do we get over an injustice? Or Sheryl Sandberg's was great. Why we have so few women leaders. I think that was the title of the talk. So in other words, so hers was a provocative question. So you could use a question, you can use just a big, bold statement, but there's different ways of approaching it. But always think to yourself, as a journalist, if I have to write a blog post on this, if I have to send out a tweet, what is my big idea? What is the one key idea that I want people to take away? And can I fit it into 140 characters? I think 140 characters is a great exercise.
It's not, and it's easier said than done. That's for sure.
It's very hard. I've worked with companies for, I'm not kidding, about 4 hours where we're just battling it out, within a management team. And even at the end of 4 hours, we're still kind of close to it, but still struggling. It's very difficult to come up with one big idea in 140 characters. But once you do it, it gives you confidence, boy. The rest of the presentation or the pitch just falls into place.
That is just huge. What a great takeaway for our audience. And Carmine, we are going to be wrapping this up at the hour, but we're talking about when developing a presentation, when developing a pitch, I've always thought it's really important to appreciate and understand who your audience is going to be. For example, if you're a rock and roll expert and you live and breathe rock and roll, but you accept a speaking gig at a country western convention, you can make it work, but the chances are there's not going to be that connection. And so I wrote the post about why you need to really figure out who your audience is going to be and then structure your message from your heart and with passion and with research to accommodate what that audience maybe needs to hear or would like to hear. Your thoughts on our audiences today. They're watching Dateline, they're watching Survivor, they're watching The Bachelor, they're watching really, really fine-tuned news shows, and they're expecting quality material. How important, when we're telling our stories, is it to accommodate our audience's expectations?
I think people want to be entertained, right? They want to be entertained, and they're used to narrative now. Now with Netflix and with with HBO type of shows and Showtime, all these very popular shows out there, they're very attuned to narrative and story structure. So if you walk in with, I call it old school PowerPoint, and I'm not talking about PowerPoint as a tool. I still use PowerPoint. PowerPoint's very powerful. And of course, attorneys use it too, Mitch, we know that. But the way people use PowerPoint is not in a narrative structure, is it? It's just a bunch of text and information put on slides. That's not the way people are used to consuming their information today. So we are a multimedia world. Thank you, Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. So how do people get their information today? They get it through pictures, images. we know that every Facebook post that has an image is going to be more likely to be viewed than a Facebook post that has text alone. So why aren't you putting any images in your presentations? Yeah. YouTube. How many, thousands of hours of YouTube are uploaded every second? There's some crazy number out there. And why aren't we using video in our presentations? Right?
It works so well.
I think there's a gap. I think and I still see this today because I go to conferences every week. And so I still see it today. I think there's a huge gap between the way people process information today and how we're delivering business presentations.
Do you think many speakers are afraid to embrace more of a TED approach because they're going to miss something? In other words, I've got to cover these 10 bullet points or else I may not make my point. They don't get the presentation approach. When I'm trying cases now, I do the TED approach. I'll put up a PowerPoint of an image of a picture. There's no words or text up there, and it allows me to tell my story, and they can look at it while I'm telling my story. But I think people are afraid that they're going to miss something or they're not going to deliver. They limit themselves by not expanding their mind on how to tell a good story. And that's why I asked the question, because
it takes courage. Yes.
Courage. Okay. Yeah,
it takes courage. It takes courage to not put anything on the screen except a picture. Yeah, that takes courage. It takes practice. It takes creativity as well. Okay. You have to really tap the creative side of your brain as well. And you have to do things a little differently. You have to think differently about the way you approach the story and how you approach the delivery of the information. So yeah, it takes work.
Yeah.
Putting up just a basic PowerPoint, filling it with text, that's easy. And anyone can add bullet points to a PowerPoint. So it does take work. It takes creativity. It takes practice. It takes rehearsals. And it does take courage to do something that is different. But I think you need to do that in today's world, especially. Let me give you a quick example, and I won't use names. I was at a business conference in Paris, and so there were a lot of young millennials. They were all blogging, live blogging at the same time. It was like an internet conference. I was behind the stage in the green room, so I could hear the speaker, and there was a speaker ahead of me who ran a very large research firm around the world, a global research firm that a lot of people would know. And so he was giving the economic forecast for where the internet was going and all that. And I started listening to him, and I really liked it. It's like, wow, this guy's really interesting. I started taking notes. And then I went out there and I gave, a very TED-like type of presentation with a lot of visuals, a lot of multimedia. That's just what I do. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the conference, we all went out to dinner, and there were a lot of millennials around, and the previous speaker was not there. And they said, boy, the good thing that guy didn't come after you, Carmine, that he was terrible. Okay. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that to make myself look better, because I was shocked though. I was like, what do you mean? He's a very well-established leader in economics today. He sounded great. What do you mean he was terrible? And they all looked at me like I was crazy. Like, didn't you see that? And I said, no, I heard it. He sounded terrific. And they said, oh, you didn't see that boring old PowerPoint he used? It's like, oh, shoot. See, you have to understand that the world is changing, and especially young people today. They want their information in narrative form. They want stories. They want images. They want multimedia. They want some entertainment value, not just the delivery of information. And I see this especially with entrepreneurs. I just talked to a very prominent economist just today. Actually, this morning we were talking by email. He sees this all the time, where young entrepreneurs, they have these incredible ideas, or they have these great products, but they're complex products, and it's all just about the features. It's all they just pitch features, but they don't understand that the way humans work today, especially raised on the Netflix generation, that we want to be entertained, we want it visual, we want it interesting and engaging. That it's a very different way of delivering information, processing information, I think, than ever before. And the social media, we live in a Twitter generation too. So it better be short and to the point, rather than long, convoluted, boring. I met somebody who said, my presentations have to be 90 minutes. They just have to be 90 minutes. I have so much information to deliver. Yeah. And then his team, the man's team, came up to me and said, our customers are actually leaving in the middle of his presentation because they don't want to sit there for 90 minutes.
Oh, that's awkward.
Yeah, so that's awkward. You have to be aware of it first, Mitch. I think that's what we're doing here. People have to be aware that there's a new way of delivering information.
It's all about respecting the time and attention of our audience. And I love it, Carmine. When I do my openings now, it used to be an hour and 20 minutes. My openings are now 20 minutes long. And when opposing counsel stands up for 2 hours and does his or her thing, the jury's yawning, they're bored, they're rolling their eyes. It is what it is. There's a new audience out there. Yeah. Speaking of a new audience,
20 minutes is not a bad thing, though, because you're forced to compress that information, which means you're getting rid of all the extraneous stuff that's not going to make that much of a difference to your audience.
I try to keep it to 18, just like TED Talks. I figure if it works for TED Talks, it could work for me. But what I want to do is I want to, Nicole, have you wrap up our show with the last question of the day. Before we do that, I want everyone to know that our special guest co-host today was Nicole Abood out of Los Angeles. She's doing amazing things on podcasts, social media, and helping young entrepreneurs set up their businesses the right way. And that's why she and I connected. And Carmine, she's going to be meeting my daughter on Thursday down at Social Media Day in San Diego. It's going to be awesome. And then, Carmine, I also want to thank you for being on, author of The Storyteller's Secret, Talk Like TED. I'll include Carmine's link over on the right. But Nicole, can you bring us home with a final best question of the day?
Oh gosh,
Carmine, I'd really appreciate it.
That's a lot.
I may not have the best answer of the day, though. I mean,
I trust both.
All the answers. You know what? Since we happen to be talking about social media, and this past weekend I went to a workshop called Snapchat for Storytelling. How do you see Snapchat becoming not valid, but a powerful storytelling tool for businesses?
Oh, I don't think it should be underestimated. No, absolutely. I love the fact that Snapchat has in fact, Snapchat itself uses the word story. Right? Yeah. You can create these live stories. And you may know that better than me. So I personally am just starting to recognize Snapchat. I've personally focused on Twitter and Facebook because for a personal brand like myself, I think it was easier for me to get my content out there. And now Instagram's been a lot of fun for me, especially using pictures and quotes, right? So a lot of people gravitate to that, and Snapchat is something new. But it's not new to most of your viewers, but it is. I think it is new to brands. I would say, though, let's just give you an umbrella statement for everything. You got to make it authentic to you. And I am very frustrated with the way brands use anything. So don't just get on Snapchat because you think you have to be there. If you're going to use, and you'll get a lot more from Gary Vaynerchuk next week or when you talk to him, but if you're going to use it, Gary's really into telling those stories that are exclusive for those particular platforms, using the platforms in the best way to tell those stories. And you got to be authentic. When I met Richard Branson once, he was on his mobile phone tweeting directly. He asked his marketing person for a picture so that he could tweet it. Whereas most leaders who I see, they have somebody else do it. It's not authentic to them. So if you're going to be on social media, then use it socially. Have conversations and have an authentic voice. And I think there's very few good leaders who do that well.
Yeah.
Well, Nicole, you did not. You came through with the best question of the day and the best answer of the day, Carmine. Really appreciate it.
That was an okay answer, but okay, I'll take it.
Exceptional. So, Carmine, if our viewers would like to, both live and recorded viewers would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
If they can remember a good Italian name like Carmine Gallo, that's all they need. So, I'm on Twitter at Carmine Gallo, or on just go to the web, carminegallo.com. And that way you can learn more about my books and you can contact me directly. We also have a URL just for storytellers. So it's called storytellersecret.com. You can learn much more about the book if you'd like, and watch videos too.
And I'll share that over in the chat and on my Twitter feed after the show. I really appreciate it, Carmine, for being on today. Thank you very much. I'm so glad our paths have crossed. I mean, your books have changed the way I'm engaging my clients and presenting evidence at arbitrations, mediations, and trials. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You bet.
And I also think your tools and techniques will work well on the social platforms, including Instagram and Snapchat. And I think Nicole, who's very involved on those platforms, I think she'll agree. Nicole, this is good stuff. We need to start sharing this with more millennials, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent.
All right, guys. Listen, Gary Vaynerchuk in 2 weeks on July 11th. And yes, Carmine, once we're done, I think everything will shut off. So you'll be good. We're not going to be watching you the rest of the day. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, reach out. If you'd like a right side of the domain, custom domain, reach out to me and I'll make it happen for you.
That is neat. Yeah, that's neat.
Pretty cool stuff. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks with Gary Vaynerchuk.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So let's see here. All right. Take care. Bye.